This workshop is going to be on company building models with DeSci and what we've been exploring with VitaDAO. I'm Maria. I come from mostly academic background. I did my PhD in aging, as Leo said, and fertility preservation. And after that, I went on to work in venture creation and VC for about a year. And now I'm in VitaDAO, doing awareness deal flow and exploring some company building models. So I'm not going to talk much about VitaDAO because Paolo Binetti gave a great presentation yesterday. So just want to kind of show you where the company building fits into the whole scheme. So as we know, resource project, they go through multiple phases, often on-chain, and when they're approved, there is an IP NFT minted. But what exactly happens between minting that IP NFT and actually selling or licensing the asset that we have to other buyers to close the loop and keep funding the DAO? So far we've been exploring two models, and I'll tell you about two projects as case studies. So first, it's the most more traditional way, if you can call it that, within DeSci, but it basically fits into the academic system. We work with the TTO, we give them a sponsored research agreement and negotiate licensing terms. And that gives us an asset, some IP that we can then incubate and ideally push towards commercialization. That at the moment, it's called the commercialization squad or the builder squad in VitaDAO. When the asset is developed enough or when the project needs more funding, we go towards tokenizing the IP NFT. And we're going to explore how can that fit into company building when you include community governance. And the second approach is decentralized tech transfer, where we basically, instead of funding a research project, we hire the researcher as a consultant and we outsource the experiment to a CRO or non-associated core facility. So we can basically retain the IP. So VitaDAO funds two big groups of projects. One are research projects, and then they become IP NFT projects, and the other ones are more traditional startup equity funding. So I've highlighted here two projects. One is the Karocha Lab project, which is developing autophagy enhancers. That was the first IP NFT that was tokenized, and Matrix Bio, which is led by Marinova, is the first incorporated company coming out of VitaDAO. So I'm not going to talk much about IP NFTs, I'm just going to briefly mention it because I'm sure you know about it and so many people gave great talks yesterday on it. But basically the legal contract that I mentioned, so the sponsored research agreement that's outlining IP terms, licensing, royalties and so on, is attached to a smart contract and put on chain. This then allows us to tokenize this IP NFT and mint intellectual property tokens, which are fungible governance tokens, and they can involve the community in governance of that specific project. So unlike the Vita token, the IPTs give you voting rights for the parent IP NFT. So it's a governance mechanism, but also a novel way to fund science. And as I mentioned, the Victor Karocha project was the first one to go through this. It was very much successful. It was 100% oversubscribed, and we raised a good amount of money for the project. However, that's not exactly company building. So if you want to go in that direction, we need to have someone to lead commercialization. So how do we move a research project to an actual company? So the builder squad was proposed in VitaDAO, and it's been an ongoing experiment, so to say, for the last couple of months. It was under seasonal governance, and we've been exploring how can that fit into the DAO model, and how can we integrate that with IPTs. So the builder squad is basically an internal squad that is independent in its structure and working principles, and it's semi-centralized. So the community votes on yearly action plan, and then it's up to the squad and the lead on how they execute and deliver on that. There is basically one squad lead and multiple project leads, so there is one person responsible for each project, and they serve as an entrepreneur in residence. But how exactly does that integrate with, how does the centralized leadership integrate with decentralized governance and IPTs and community participation? So here I've outlined that there are some discrepancies in what's happening at the moment. And we are workshopping this at the moment. It's all work in progress, so I hope it can be useful for your own DAOs, and I want to open the stage after this to see how do you think that can be used. So basically the squad acts on an yearly plan that's been voted by the DAO on goals and activities, but it's entirely up to the squad lead to determine how that happens, and the leads have a lot of freedom in how they execute on each project. And that was designed in order to maximize accountability and maximize efficiency, because in a DAO model there are many people involved doing one thing and it's not sometimes working that well. So how can we combine the more structured traditional approach that's been proven to work in company building with the IPT governance principles? Because when you tokenize the IP NFT, you basically create a mini DAO that is run by the members that buy in. So the members have full governance rights over the parent IP NFT, and they have ultimate autonomy basically, or that's the idea of the whole system, including the token holders can select the project lead. So I kind of want to open the stage and ask if you see problems here, if you see opportunities here, how can we involve the IP token holders in a meaningful way, so they're not a challenge on how we incorporate them into the company, but rather they can be an asset. So I know VitaDAO is the furthest along in that process, but if any of the other DAOs is thinking about commercializing soon, are there any thoughts or comments?
Question, how do you decide supply, and what are the rules for the token contract? Are there any distinct parameters that you consider, like transferability or time locking, that sort of thing? Are there any attributes that are worth mentioning?
You mean for the IPT?
For the IPT, how do you decide how many and what other properties do they have?
I think that's a question for Molecule. I'm not on the tokenomic side of things, but maybe.
Yeah, so basically the valuation comes from the funding. So if the project received 200K, that's like the valuation you start with. And then you let the market figure out the price. You do an auction. So basically first you have the IP NFT that has the research attached to it. And then in order to raise for the scientific project, that IP NFT gets basically split up into the IPT tokens, and those can then be governed by multiple parties. So everyone here could then buy a few IPTs and would technically own a share in the project. Yeah, there's also some legal stuff. I cannot go too much into detail, but it would then allow basically a group of people to decide or basically co-govern the research project and vote also in decisions. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting blog posts I can refer to, and the first project, yeah, maybe you want to continue, but so basically we did it earlier this year, and it's now trading on an open market, and then you have price discovery. So basically you value the asset, the open market values the asset. Yeah. And if people hold the tokens and do not sell, then you have a pretty stable evaluation for the research.
Thank you. So, are there any members of HERDAR, for example, now they're exploring a interesting model involving consumers in the whole process, which could be much more valuable when you have a community. Okay, I can move on, and then we can have more questions at the end. So the second mechanism I wanted to talk about is decentralized tech transfer, which is instead of going through the traditional academic system and working with the TTO to reach an agreement on how to fund the project and what do we get out of it, we basically remove the middleman and hire the researcher as a consultant, so we can then perform all of the experiments in a CRO or an associated organization, which gives us the ability to retain all of the IP and distribute the benefits to the researcher and to the DAO. So the funds are spent in a very efficient way. So all of the funds allocated from the DAO go towards developing an IP. This is different when you fund through a TTO and a university, because you need to pay a huge overhead tax, huge overhead to the university, and it's extremely inefficient because TTOs take a lot of time to get back to you. If you've ever dealt with one, it's a bit of a pain. So we skip that and go directly to the researcher, form a plan with them, and execute on it with external partners. We think that also identifies entrepreneurially minded scientists that can then work with us to create and lead the company and potentially cross the valley of death and bring a therapeutic to market. And last but not least, we think that can allow DAO to DAO coordination and cooperation, especially with service providers like LabDAO. And thank you, Nicholas, for a great presentation before that. The project that's going through the process is Vera Gorbanova's project. She's a very well-recognized researcher in the aging field. She's a geroscientist who studies different organisms that have distinct biology to us, and leveraging the naked mole rat biology to extend human lifespan. The naked mole rats are very interesting. They're the size of a rat, but they live 10 times longer. So Vera is studying what biological mechanisms are responsible for that and whether we can implement that to human aging. So her lab discovered that high molecular hyaluronic acid is an extracellular matrix component that is responsible for NMR resilience to a big degree. And the research was published in Nature because this is only NMR specific thing. She's been trying to figure out how could that be translated to mice and even to humans. So the experiments in mice were also successful. They did a genetic model that had more high molecular weight hyaluronic acid, and they lived 10% longer. They had increased cancer resistance, and because genetic engineering is not exactly viable in humans right now, they are exploring a way to target that therapeutically through small molecules, and they have identified 3,000 compounds to screen and one hit so far. So VitaDAO funded this new co-incorporation called Matrix Bio, and we've been working with Vera and some CROs to develop the project further. There will be IP NFT again around the new chemical entities. So the company owns that IP and can then use it or out-license it as follows. So the decentralized tech transfer is just one way.
Keep going.
the centralized tech transfer replaces the first part, but then it would also be integrated likely somehow in DAO incubation through the builder squad. Otherwise, it would also have the IP NFT mechanism, so we go back to similar kind of questions and challenges. But I think you also go this way with your BioDAOs, and I hope it's useful to think about that kind of stuff from an early stage. When you fund the projects, how can they be commercialized later on? So yeah, happy to open for questions. I think we have some more
Yes,
time.
we do. Yes, we do. Yeah, sure, go ahead.
I have a very general question. Let's assume I'm a scientist, and let's assume I have some scientific idea. In a DAO, usually there's no employer, there's no employee, right? There's no working contract, nothing, usually, right? So let's assume I have an idea, and I can contribute this idea to several DAOs, right? So theoretically, I could receive IPTs from several DAOs for the same scientific idea. Is that possible, and how do you tackle that?
So as a scientist, you can apply for multiple DAOs, and then we do sign NDAs, so your idea is protected. We then assess the idea, and if your project is funded, you could get an IP NFT for it. The proposal that you submit to one DAO versus another DAO, it could be different. So you can fund different sides of your idea, because one DAO would know if another DAO funded your project on the exact same thing. So it wouldn't really make sense for us to fund it again. Does that answer your question?
Probably.
You can also mint it yourself, so you can mint your own IP NFT, so it's permissionless. But yeah, the DAO is usually like is there for developing the project with you, developing a design language for the project, doing video content production and stuff like that. Yeah, so it's more also, it's not just funding, it's also in most cases it's also like company building and support and incubation. Yeah.
And isn't the idea of the IP NFT exactly that you basically make your IP traceable and public, so it's out there, everyone knows it's out there, and another DAO will probably, will know about it, it's on the blockchain, so they will probably not say, hey, you can mint this IP NFT with us again, right? There were other questions in the...
That's an interesting example for like the COVID vaccine, right? If you were Moderna and say you were a scientist with that vaccine, you went to Beta DAO, minted it with Beta DAO, and went to Genomes DAO, minted it with Genomes DAO, if they did that, right? So there must be like an incentive for each of those companies to say they claim it, right? Because it's really valuable. So yeah, I don't know. I can't figure out like exactly how that would pan out.
Yeah. Do you want to comment on that, Maria? Okay.
In Mara's case, it heard that like she was like not doing any like she was for IP users that had straight to the CRO to communicate. Let's say like translation or process study is like based on the IP. So in many countries and universities that might not work because they do not allow to consume that security most higher right, from the university. So what do you see like in terms of like any kind of legal consequences? It might be like viable solution that you identify the researchers early on, okay, don't do disclosure, but leave academia, go to the theory, do the proof of concept. As still if it was like previous studies were close to like proof of concept, then there might be some issues.
Yeah, I mean that's always going to be a problem, and we need to comply with whatever laws are in the particular country. And some universities wouldn't allow their researchers to consult at all or have any outside commitments. So of course it's a very case-to-case basis on each project, and we have to respect that.
Cool. Maybe I can ask one last question, Maria. So, and maybe it's, yeah, I'm just not aware, but you were describing this new way of building basically the decentralized tech transfer office and going around, basically, yeah, going around the traditional tech transfer office and owning that IP directly. But isn't that for the Vera performing her science in the lab of that university? So how does this go into practice? How can you just kind of exclude the TTO?
So scientists always work on multiple projects at the same time. So Vera can have her own research that's funded by government grants, for example. And for that research study, there will be a plan approved on what she would work on. So she uses that money for her own experiments, and that's a different project that she's working with us on. So it's a little different.
Yeah.
Sebastian is going to follow up. I'm sure he knows more.
Yeah, he's going to follow up perfectly. All right, cool. Give it up for Maria. Thank you very much.